I didn't plan on going up into that attic. My cousin had called me out of the blue, saying she needed help cleaning out her late grandmother's house, a place tucked away in the foothills, worn and weathered like it had been left to sink slowly into the forest around it. She hadn't set foot in it for decades, and I guess she thought my curiosity and willingness to climb into dusty corners would come in handy. The first time I walked in, the smell hit me before anything else, a mix of rotting wood, mothballs, and the faint, sharp tang of something metallic I couldn't place. The house was silent in a way that felt almost deliberate, like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone stupid enough to disturb it. We started in the living room, dragging boxes and old furniture toward the door, my cousin muttering about all the things her grandmother had hoarded, magazines yellowed with age, dolls with cracked faces, porcelain tea sets that had no hope of surviving another move. I kept hearing a faint creak above me in the attic, like the floorboards themselves were sighing. After hours of pulling things out, I finally asked if we could check up there, and she hesitated, which only made my curiosity worse. She followed me, and together we pulled the attic door down, letting a thin stream of gray light fall across the cramped space. Dust hung thick in the air. Old boxes leaned like they were ready to collapse, and cobwebs draped corners of the rafters. My cousin stayed near the stairs, saying she didn't want to go further, but I kept moving, brushing aside boxes to see what was underneath. That's when I saw it. A single VHS tape, lying on its side with no label, no case, nothing to indicate why it was up here or what it contained. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it, feeling like it was heavy not just with plastic and tape, but with something else I couldn't name. My curiosity won over any caution. I had to see what was on it. We carried it down to the living room. My cousin looked uneasy, lingering near the stairs like she wanted to leave, but I insisted on using the old VCR her grandmother had left behind. The tape slid into the player with a reluctant whir, the screen flickering to life. At first it was just darkness, then grainy images began to appear, like the world had been drained of color. I recognized the space immediately, though I couldn't place why. The angles of furniture, the patterns on the rug, it was familiar. Then slowly my mind connected the dots. It was her grandmother's living room, exactly as it had been decades ago, the way I had never seen it, frozen in time. At first it seemed harmless. The TV flickered weakly, static jumping across the screen, casting shadows that danced across the room. There was no sound beyond the hiss of the tape, no people moving, no voices. But then I noticed the child. A small boy or girl I couldn't tell, sitting alone on the floor. They were whispering, quiet at first, soft syllables I couldn't understand. The camera lingered on them, like it had been placed there intentionally, a silent observer documenting something that had no right to exist in the quiet of a home. My stomach tightened as I realized I had seen that child before, not in real life, but in dreams, fleeting images that didn't make sense. And then the figure appeared. At first I thought it was a trick of the shadows, a coat hanging in the corner or a piece of furniture draped with a sheet. But no, this figure was tall, thin, unnervingly still. It didn't move like a person. It just watched, always at the edge of the frame, never centered, never blinking. Its presence made the room feel smaller, heavier, like the air itself was being compressed. My hands shook as I reached for the stop button, but the tape didn't respond. It rewound itself, looping back to moments I hadn't seen, forcing me to watch again, forcing me to see the child whispering, forcing me to see the figure standing silently, unblinking, patient. The whispers became clearer, forming words I recognized, my name over and over. At first I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of memory and fear. But then the words grew sharper, more deliberate, like someone, or something, was trying to reach through the screen, trying to communicate. I called my cousin into the room, voice shaking, pointing at the TV. She stared, pale, then shook her head. "That house has been empty for years," she said. Her words made sense, but they didn't comfort me. How could that child, that figure, be there if no one had lived here for decades? I tried to turn the tape off again, yanking at the player, pressing buttons, even unplugging it. Nothing worked. Each time, the tape would start again, rewinding to the beginning, looping scenes I didn't remember seeing, images I was certain hadn't been recorded. The child's voice grew urgent, whispering my name in fragments, in syllables that sounded almost like warnings. I could feel the weight of eyes on me, not just the figure on the screen, but something pressing through the walls, something aware of my presence, something that had been waiting. We went back to the attic, hoping that maybe it would make sense there, that the source of this madness could be found. But when we opened the trap door, the space was empty. The tape, the dusty boxes, even the cobwebs I had brushed aside, they were gone. The attic looked untouched, as if no one had been there in years. My cousin refused to go further, but I wanted answers. I wanted to know what I had seen, what I had felt pressing against me from the screen. All I found was the memory of that tape, the quiet whispers repeating my name, and the way the shadows clung to the corners of the attic, stubborn and silent. That night, I stayed at my cousin's house, unable to sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind against the windows, made my heart jump. I could feel the presence of something just beyond sight, something patient. My dreams were filled with flickering images, the child, the tall figure, the room I had seen on the tape. They were always watching, always waiting. Even when I woke, the feeling didn't leave me. The memory of the attic, the smell of dust and mothballs, the whispers of a voice that had no right to know my name, lingered like a fog I couldn't shake. I've tried to tell people about it, to explain what happened, but most dismiss it. It's just an old house, an old tape, they say. But they don't understand the way it follows you, the way a simple memory can become a presence, a weight in the chest that doesn't go away. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear whispers from empty rooms, shadows moving in corners where nothing should be. I don't know if the tape was recording the past or the present, if the figure was real or some memory the house had preserved. All I know is that the attic exists in my mind now, a place I can never enter again. A space filled with watching eyes and a voice that still calls my name. I haven't returned to that house, though my cousin lives there now. I can't. Even thinking about climbing those stairs, opening that trap door makes my chest tighten, makes my hands sweat. It's not just the tape or the images I saw. It's the feeling of being observed, of being remembered by something that shouldn't have remembered me. I've tried to forget, tried to convince myself it was just a trick of light, a childhood memory twisted by dust and shadows. But it's never gone. I see the figure in the corner of my mind, always just out of reach, patient, waiting. I hear the whispers when the house is empty, when the night is still. Sometimes I wake in the middle of the night, and for a second, I'm back in that living room, standing in front of that TV, staring at a child who shouldn't exist. And in that moment, the figure is there too, always at the edge, always waiting. And I realize it never left. The house, the tape, the attic. They are part of me now, stitched into my memory like some indelible scar. I don't know if it's watching me, or if I'm just carrying the watching inside myself. Either way, I can't escape it. I can't undo the knowing. And so I live with it. The quiet dread, the whispers, the shadows that linger in the corners of my mind. I've tried to speak about it, tried to tell someone, anyone, but the words always fall short. It wasn't just a tape. It wasn't just an attic. It was something else, something patient and deliberate. Something that remembered me long before I knew I could be remembered. I haven't returned, and I don't think I ever will. The memory itself is enough to keep me awake. Enough to make the night feel alive, full of waiting eyes, full of whispers calling my name, calling me back to a place I can never and will never touch again. I found the camcorder in a dusty box at a garage sale on the edge of town, the kind of place where things sit forgotten for years, left to gather the smell of mildew and time. The man selling it was old, wiry, with hands that shook as he handed it over, and he muttered a warning I didn't pay much attention to. Haven't used that in years. Don't know what's on them. I smiled, nodded, and thought nothing of it. At home, I dusted it off, slipped in the first tape that was still inside, and pressed play. The little screen flickered to life, grainy and pale, showing a street I knew, but not the one I lived on now. It was empty, worn down, almost abandoned, and a thick mist hovered low, clinging to the cracked sidewalks and the uneven lawns. The houses looked hollowed out, broken in ways that didn't make sense. I thought maybe the tape was old, footage from years ago, some forgotten recording of my neighborhood. But the details didn't match anything I could remember. footsteps echoed faintly across the screen, but I could see no one moving. Then out of the haze, a figure appeared. It was hunched, dragging its hands along the ground in a way that made me flinch. The movement was wrong, jerky, unnatural, and it seemed to move against the wind, slow and deliberate. I leaned closer, heart hammering, and realized the figure was creeping toward the camera, always just on the edge of frame. I tried to rewind, hoping maybe the camera had captured a trick of light or some passerby, but the footage didn't rewind in the usual sense. Instead, it rolled forward, showing more of the figure, more of the mist, more of my street. It was as if the camcorder had a mind of its own, choosing exactly what I was meant to see, forcing me to watch. Every clip that followed revealed someone, or something, watching me, though I was alone in my house. Shadows shifted in the corners of the screen, barely perceptible, and every so often, the hunched figure would move past a yard, pause to glance toward the window that faced my house, and continue. My pulse spiked each time, and I wanted to turn it off, to throw the camcorder in the trash, but my hands stayed frozen. The static on the screen would flare violently whenever I looked away, like the tape itself was punishing me, making sure I didn't miss anything. I couldn't, even when I tried to avert my gaze. I caught glimpses of it, the elongated arms dragging across the cracked pavement, the head tilting unnaturally, the slow, deliberate crawl toward the house I called home. It was surreal. My street looked normal outside my window, the familiar houses bathed in the late afternoon light, nothing like what I was seeing on the screen. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed, that the figure on the camcorder was aware of me, knew I was watching. Every subtle movement it made, every pause and tilt of its head felt directed. The footage was too precise, too deliberate. It wasn't just recording a street, it was recording me. Every moment, every step I took in my living room, every time I shifted in my chair, seemed to be mirrored by that hunched figure, creeping just out of reach, impossibly patient. I tried turning the camcorder off, pressing buttons, tugging at the power cord, but it stayed on. The screen didn't black out. It simply rewound itself in its own rhythm, replaying moments I didn't recognize. Houses I knew had fallen into disrepair. Lawns that had been meticulously kept in reality were overgrown and wild in the tape. I could see every detail, every flaw, and every time I tried to tell myself it was just old footage, just static and a malfunctioning camera, the tape would flare again, forcing me to see something new. A shadow where there shouldn't be one, a movement that didn't belong, the feeling that eyes were tracing me through the lens. I became obsessed. Days passed, or maybe hours, I couldn't tell. I would sit in my living room, replaying the tape, watching the hunched figure move across my street, across my own yard, creeping closer to my window. I didn't sleep much. The boundaries between the footage and reality blurred. I'd see a flicker in the corner of my vision and my heart would leap, but when I turned, nothing was there. Still, the feeling lingered, heavy and oppressive, that some part of that tape had crossed over into my world, following me even when the screen went dark. I showed it to a friend once, trying to get someone else to see it, to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. They looked at the screen, squinting, and said it was just a broken camcorder, a glitch, something meant to spook, but ultimately harmless. I knew they didn't understand. They couldn't see the pattern, the intentionality of the figure's movements, the way the tape revealed details no one could have known, not without being there. I could see my own house, my own windows, being watched through the lens, being recorded in ways I couldn't comprehend. The static, the flare, the impossibility of turning away, all of it made the tape feel alive. Not alive like a living creature, but alive like awareness, intelligence embedded in celluloid and magnetic tape. I tried to throw it out once. I carried the camcorder to the dumpster at the end of the street and dropped it in, thinking I could finally be free. That night, I woke to the flicker of a screen, soft blue light reflecting on my bedroom wall. I hadn't turned anything on, and yet, in the darkness, the figure appeared again, hunched and dragging its hands along a surface that shouldn't exist, slowly moving closer to my bed. My blood ran cold. I shut my eyes, and when I opened them, the screen was dark, but the presence hadn't left. In the days that followed, I would catch glimpses of it in corners, in reflections, in brief shadows that didn't belong. I never saw it directly in the house, but I felt it, always, patient, watching, waiting, Sometimes I wonder if it only exists in the tape. If the camcorder itself is a kind of lens into some other perception, a place where the figure waits until someone foolish enough turns the machine on. But the feeling doesn't leave. Even when the tape isn't playing, the memory of it, the image of the hunched figure creeping across my street, dragging hands along the ground, remains. I see it when I glance out my window, when I walk to my car at night, when I move through the empty house in silence. My eyes are drawn to corners, to shadows, to movements that may not be there, and I feel that same gaze, deliberate and impossible, as if the tape never stopped recording. I stopped trying to show anyone else. I stopped trying to explain. No one could understand. The camcorder sits in a box under my bed now, untouched, and yet I can't bring myself to throw it away. I don't want to. There's a part of me that knows it would be waiting again, ready to reveal what I don't want to see, ready to drag me into its slow, impossible observation. I've started sleeping with lights on, leaving the blinds drawn, but still, when I close my eyes, I see it. The hunched figure moving against the wind, creeping across my yard, always just outside the frame. It doesn't belong here, and yet it follows me, attached to the memory of the camcorder, to the tape, to the act of looking, forcing me to watch, forcing me to remember. It's been months now, maybe a year. The street is normal again. Neighbors come and go. Cars pass, dogs bark. Everything is ordinary. And yet, I feel it at the edge of perception, patient and silent, waiting for the moment I might glance at a screen again, or even just at a shadow, and it will be there, as real as the floor beneath my feet. It doesn't need to cross into the physical world. It doesn't have to. The tape has made sure I remember that I never feel safe, that even in the quiet of day, or the normality of night, there's a part of me that knows the hunched figure is watching, always, somewhere, just out of reach, just beyond comprehension, tethered to the lens, tethered to me. I can't look away. I can't forget. I inherited the cabin quietly, without ceremony, a small weathered place tucked deep in the Appalachian foothills, a place my family had left untouched for decades. It wasn't much, a simple structure of worn wood and stone, surrounded by thick forest that pressed close to the walls like it was keeping secrets. I went up there in early fall, when the leaves were turning, the air crisp and damp, and the cabin smelled of old pine, dust, and time. I didn't plan to stay long, just a few days to clean and maybe restore it a little, but something about it made me linger. The silence was heavy, oppressive even, like the forest itself was aware of my presence. The first night I barely slept, listening to the wind in the pines, the creak of the old boards, and the occasional rustle of something moving in the underbrush. By the second day, I decided to check the floors more closely. Some of the boards were warped, others cracked, and as I pried one loose in the living room, I found it, a small wooden box hidden beneath the floorboards. It was unremarkable, weathered, no markings except for the faint smell of age and something earthy, like soil pressed into the grain. Inside, I found 3 tapes, each labeled with dates from the 1970s. They looked ordinary at first, but the way they had been hidden made me uneasy, as if whoever put them there had wanted to keep them from ever being found. I carried them inside, set up the old VCR that had been left behind, and slid in the first tape. The screen flickered to life with the grainy, washed-out image of the cabin. At first, nothing happened, just a static room, the furniture exactly where it had been when I arrived. I leaned closer, thinking maybe it was some old family footage, when subtle movements caught my eye, footsteps where no one should be, shadows bending at odd angles, the reflection of a figure in a window that wasn't physically there. I froze. The camera never moved, yet it was showing things from angles that made no sense, angles that seemed impossible. And then I saw them, people I didn't know, moving in silence, faces obscured, performing some kind of ritual in the clearing behind the cabin. They didn't acknowledge the camera, didn't even glance at it, just moved with purpose, deliberate, unnerving. I tried to tell myself it was a dream, some trick of the tape, but the details were too precise, too real. The way the leaves rustled, the way the light fell across the forest floor. The second tape was worse. The people were closer now, the camera capturing them moving through the cabin itself. Shadows lingered in corners I knew should be empty, shifting ever so slightly, almost like breathing. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach nodding as I realized I was watching something I shouldn't have. something that had been hidden for decades. Every subtle motion on the screen made the cabin feel alive, as if it were remembering what had happened, recalling it through the tape. The footage looped oddly, repeating moments that didn't make sense. But each repetition added to the feeling of being observed, watched through the lens by those who had been long gone, or perhaps never meant to leave. By the third tape, I could barely bring myself to insert it. My hands shook, and the air in the cabin felt heavier, as though the forest outside had pressed closer, waiting for me to see it. The tape began with static, a white haze on the screen, and for the first minute, I thought it was damaged, unusable. Then a single frame appeared, my face. I sat back, heart hammering. Not a recording of me from this week, not a sketch or photo, but live, my face staring back at me as though the camera had captured me while I slept in the very cabin I was in. I recoiled, my breath shallow, and the tape played on, showing glimpses of my movements in real time, intercut with frames of shadows lingering at the edges. The same people I had seen before, always just out of focus, always just watching. I dropped the tape. The VCR sat there, humming faintly, and I realized that the recordings were not just old. They were alive in a way I couldn't explain. They weren't meant to show the past or record the present. They were meant to trap attention, to make the observer feel seen, caught, like a moth in a jar. That night, sleep didn't come. I lay on the old bed, listening to the cabin settle, imagining every corner alive with movement, feeling the eyes of the tape's inhabitants on me, even though nothing moved. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the floor, a branch scraping the side of the house, felt amplified, threatening, deliberate. The next day, I went back to the floorboards. I wanted to hide the tapes somewhere else, or burn them, or bury them, anything to escape their gaze. But when I lifted the boards again, the box was gone. The wood looked undisturbed, like nothing had been there. I searched the cabin from top to bottom, even outside into the forest, but it was gone. And yet, I could feel it, the memory of those tapes, the way they had captured me, followed me, lingered in the air like a mist I couldn't shake. I found myself glancing at every shadow, listening to every sound, aware that someone, or something, might be just out of reach. Observing, patient, I stayed longer than I had planned. Unable to leave the cabin, unable to forget, I would sit for hours in the living room, staring at the floor, imagining the box under the boards, imagining the tape still recording, imagining that those people were still moving through the forest behind the cabin, waiting for me to look. Nights were worse than days. The wind through the trees sounded like whispered voices, and I swore I could hear faint footsteps across the creaking boards above me, though I was alone. Every flicker of light, every shifting shadow made my skin crawl. The memory of the tapes, the images they had forced me to see, had embedded themselves in my mind, a slow, grinding dread that no sunlight could erase. I considered leaving. I almost did. I packed a bag, ready to walk out onto the gravel road through the forest and never return. But as I stood at the door, the wind shifted, and for a moment, the forest seemed to press closer, the trees bending slightly as if leaning in to watch. I froze. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but enough to remind me that the tapes weren't gone. That box, those people, the figure of my own face staring back at me, they had left something behind. Something that couldn't be unpacked or discarded, something that had woven itself into the cabin, into the forest, into me. I stayed. I cleaned, I repaired, I did small things to make the cabin livable, but I never touched the floorboards again. I didn't want to know if the box would return. I didn't want to know if the tapes were still recording, capturing, waiting. At night I keep a lamp on, leave the windows cracked just enough to hear the wind, and still sometimes I catch the faintest shadow moving at the edge of my vision. I tell myself it's imagination, fatigue, the stress of isolation, but a part of me knows better. The cabin remembers, the tapes remember, the forest remembers, and so I live with it, in that quiet dread, the feeling of being observed pressing at the edges of my thoughts. I hear the faint rustle of leaves, the creak of the floor, the whispers of wind through the pines, and I think of the box, of the tapes, of the shadows in the clearing. I think of my own face staring back at me, and I know that some part of me will never escape this place, this memory, this knowledge. I leave the cabin now only when I must, but I can never truly go far. The roads wind through the hills, the trees stretch tall and close, and the memory of the tapes, of the box beneath the floorboards, follows me. In quiet moments I feel it, the awareness, the observation, the patient waiting. I can't explain it, can't rationalize it, but it's there. And I know that even if I return to the world outside, even if I never step foot in that cabin again, part of me will remain there, tethered to the floorboards, to the tapes, to the people I will never see but who continue to watch, and I don't think it will ever let me go.